of movement that we can use to access our yoga practice from kind of an intellectual level, learning these anatomical movement terms. And we're going down to the knee and the ankle and the toes for this one. All right, we start in anatomical position as always, and you're going to see the position of my knee. It's straight. This is full knee extension, hopefully. We want that knee straight, not locked back or hyperextended. If I go into knee flexion, I'll just turn to the side here. Knee flexion is going to be that, and knee extension is that right there. So knee flexion is bending, and knee extension is straightening. We're trying to always avoid that process of hyperextending. I can't really hyperextend my knees really well, but you'll know if you see the joint bowing back in that direction. You don't want that to happen, because then you're not engaging the muscles around your legs the way that we want to. You are dumping weight into the joint and relying on connective tissue to stabilize you, rather than engaging your muscles and creating strength and awareness to keep your alignment. So just watch for that. There's a lot of poses that we use knee flexion in. In the warrior poses, the front knee is flexed to somewhere close to 90 degrees. When we do chair pose, there's knee flexion that happens. And when you're working on positions of knee flexion and extension, you're going to feel a lot of work in the quads and the top of the leg and in the hamstrings. Those are the two groups that are going to be working back and forth with that movement, but we'll talk about that later when we get to the muscles. So that's knee flexion and extension, easy one, right? Just two movements. But now we go down to a tricky joint, which is the ankle. Not super tricky, but the terms here can be a little bit confusing because we've used flexion and extension as a pairing for the rest of the joints, but for some reason with the ankles, the anatomists of the past decided, no, we're going to name this differently. So here's neutral. This is where the ankle is in anatomical position. If I go from here, and what we would typically call pointing your ankle would be plantar flexion, because we said the sole of the foot, the bottom of the foot, is the plantar surface of the foot. So if I push toward that, that's plantar flexion. The top of my foot is the dorsal aspect of my foot. If I had a dorsal fin, it would be on that side of my foot. So if I dorsiflex, it means that I'm lifting my ankle up away from the floor. So it's plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. The two spots that I like to use that in class, I love to do toe balances, because toe balances are so great for working on balance and engaging the muscles in the legs. So if I go up into a toe balance, you can see I'm pushing my weight down toward the ball of my foot. My ankle goes into a plantar flexed position. Then bringing that down, a lot of times when I'm practicing balances that involve standing on one foot, I'll have my students dorsiflex their ankle. Or if we're going into a hip opening position, here I'm going into external rotation into awkward chair, doing a little bit of dorsiflexion with the ankle and extension with the toes engages some of the muscles that come up toward the knee and can give you that aspect of stabilizing your knee rather than just leaving your foot floppy and trying to go into that hip opener, running a little bit more risk of putting more strain into the knee than you would ideally want. So, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. I can't really do that without doing the toes, but we're going to the toes next. Okay, so plantar flexion and dorsiflexion happen on the sagittal plane. There's a plane that comes right up through the foot, divides it into right and left, and that's the plane where you're seeing that ankle movement forward and back. Now here's the tricky one with the ankle. We have this side to side movement that we do with the foot. And it's kind of comparable to pronation and supination with the hands. So it might be easier for you to think about the terms like that if you kind of understand the hand movements already. Pronation with the palms is palm down. So pronation with the feet would be turning like you're pushing your palm or the sole of the foot down, putting the weight into my big toes. And then if I was going to supinate my hands, I would turn my palms up toward the ceiling. With supination with the feet, I would roll my ankles out. It's like I'm trying to turn the plantar surface of my foot up, that fleshy underside of the foot and the fleshy side of the palm, okay? Pronation, supination. Sometimes you're going to hear this by another term. Okay, so if I turn in and I'm pronating, I'm lifting the outsides of my feet, that would be called eversion. Or if I supinate my hands and supinate my feet or lift the inside edge of my foot, that would be inversion. Inversion and eversion. Think about the edge of the foot that's lifting and coming up higher than you want it to. Eversion, inversion. All right, so that's something that we typically don't want to happen when we're doing our yoga practice, especially when we're standing. But a lot of us have a tendency to either slightly pronate or supinate, or to do it a lot, depending on if we have weakness on the inside or the outside of the ankle. This is something you're going to see very frequently in warrior pose, and I'll kind of exaggerate it. If I collapse to the inside of my ankle and I fall into my arch, my toe, my pinky toe, is going to lift up. The whole back edge of my foot comes right up off the mat, and I'm overly pronated. So I want to drop down into the pinky toe, try to even out the pressure on the inside and outside of my foot. Sometimes you'll see that go the other way, which I can't do as easily, but if I roll toward my pinky toe and just kind of drop my weight to the outside of my ankle, my big toe comes up, I'm over supinating. Okay, and same correction there, you just even out the pressure between the inside and the outside of the foot. But this is a good exercise in awareness to try to even out the pressure forward and back using plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, and then even out the pressure from the inner and outer edges of the foot using pronation and supination. You want to try to find those four corners of the feet and ground down through each of them evenly. Then take that and transfer it into some of your other poses. When we come down into other poses, making sure that we're not dropping out too much or falling in too much. All right, ankle, and now we're going down to the toes. Okay, the toes, we can call them the phalanges, just like the fingers, which is nice. One less word to remember. With the toes, we get forward and back movement, just like we do with the shoulder flexion and extension. But the toe flexion, so I'm going to mirror it with my hand. Toe flexion is bending the little joints of my toe like I'm trying to scrunch up my mat. Okay, and then toe extension, I would try to lift my toes back and up off the mat. As you're doing toe extension, feel how that activates the front line on the shin, the muscles that come up there. Really nice work with that. I like to use that a lot when we're doing balancing poses, activating the foot to activate the muscles in the rest of the leg. It's going to give you a more engaged and aware balance pose. And using a bit of flexion with your toes, now I'm kind of exaggerating it so that you can see, but when we're standing in mountain pose and we're trying to create this connection with the feet down into the floor, we've rooted down through the four corners, and we activate the tips of the toes to gently hold the floor. And we call the combination of those things pada bandha. Pada is the foot and bandha is an energy lock. So we have this strong, aware attention into the feet being rooted into the floor. That's going to be the foundation that you want to start with for all of your standing poses, all of your balancing poses, everything where the foot is making contact with a surface. So then the last movement that we'll talk about with the toes is the ability to spread and scrunch the toes from side to side, very much like the hand. Okay, so I can pull my fingers so that they're lined up right next to each other. I can pull my toes in, usually that's their resting position, and then I'm going to try to spread them out. You don't get as much space in the toes, but that's the idea. Spread them out, bring them right next to each other. That's another movement that's going to help you with balancing poses. A slightly abducted toe or toes will broaden the front of your foot, give you a wider base. so that when you come up, you'll feel more steady. And it counteracts this process that we have most of the day when we're wearing shoes and our toes are constantly scrunched, especially if you wear high heels. Our toes get all scrunched together. We lose the flexibility in between the toes and the muscles that are in between the bones that make up our foot. Those little muscles in there and the flexibility of the toes to spread and come back together, extend and flex, has a lot to do with our balance. So the more aware that you can be of those slight movements and slight adjustments that we do with our toes, the better your balancing is going to be. Not just in your yoga practice, but being able to walk around. And as we age, balance always starts to decline if we don't keep a good focus on it. So flexibility in the feet is going to help you to maintain your balance as you age. All right, so I think we've gotten them all. We got the knee, the ankle, and the toes. So the next video for the anatomy series is going to be a top to bottom practice where we go through each of the joints, each of the movements, and look at some of the yoga poses where we really utilize those specific movements. It's going to be a great warm-up sequence because it hits all the movements at all of the joints throughout the body. So I hope you can join me for our anatomy of movement yoga practice. Thank you for watching. Namaste.